Well, welcome back to another podcast with me, Rich Martin, and I'm so grateful that you're with us today. And today is with a friend of mine, Adam Graeber. And Adam is one of these people who I've bumped into in the world that I'm involved with. My kind of 9-to-5 job is to connect people through technology to the Bible, and I help a startup app, and that's how I bumped into Adam, who I speak to today. And one of the things I love to do is I kind of geek out when it comes to the digital side of the gospel, the digital side to God's kingdom, and it fascinates me. And Adam is one of the kind of top people that I've ever bumped into on this. He has a theology brain and a doctrine type of way of looking at things, and he's managed to merge all that with his also great insight into technology. And so heads up, this is a deep dive into the technological world. It might not be your thing, so you're more than welcome just to skip to a different one, but if you're into the digital stuff, he has some really interesting stuff to say, and he's a great wealth of knowledge. And so let's jump straight into Adam Graeber. So it's so good. Adam Graeber is with me here, and I've known Adam for a number of months now and connected through the digital world, which is what we're doing this on as well. And Adam, was going to do a whole introduction piece, and then I just read your website. So I actually just want to read what you've put on your website, because I think it gives people a much better indication of who you are. And so it says, Adam Graeber co-hosts the Device and Virtue podcast, is a consultant with Leadership Network and FaithTech, and a coach at Wheaton College Center for Faith and Innovation. Adam researches and writes on emerging technologies and consults with Christian leaders on digital spiritual formation. He's developed tech courses for Northern Seminary and Fuller Seminary. He speaks regularly on everything from Metaverse to evangelism chatbots. He has written for Christianity Today, the Bulwark, Relevant, Christ and Pop Culture, and others. He has a master's in Digital Theology from Durham University, previously worked in Bible publishing, and still gets Netflix DVDs by mail. I didn't even know they did that. So that's so good.
They still do it, man. I'm grandfathered in at $5 a month, and man, I'll ride that thing till it's dead, I think.
I mean, two things out of that. One, you must be on the board at the Netflix head office as Adam Graeber, like he's our outlier. And number two, you still have a DVD player, which I
do. And it's fantastic. The reason is that I know if I had a streaming service, I would just sit down and flip through every night, and I could not get anything else done. And so I need to have some sort of boundary. And making it a little bit harder to watch DVDs means that I spend my time doing other things that I think I truly care about more.
Such a good idea. But thanks so much for coming on there, Adam. That is the introduction on your website. Can you give us a little whistle-stop tour of how you've essentially taken your passion for theology and wired it into the digital space? And then we're going to unpack of how can this help people? How can it help church leaders? You know, and I love reading what you've wrote. I love chatting to you on different topics. You have this incredible depth of biblical understanding and knowledge, and you have this insane knowledge also of the digital space, and the fact that you've combined the two is pretty rare. And so, yeah, can you give us a little whistle-stop tour?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I'm so grateful to be here on the podcast. Yeah, I started my career in book publishing. I was working on Bibles primarily, and got to edit, Bibles that had additional content in them. But yeah, I mean, through that process of dealing with language a lot, and dealing with, this old technology of books, and just experiencing the process of becoming an editor and doing all this work, I just realized how much our jobs are formative for us. They focus our minds and our attention on things where we get really specialized and we become experts in that one thing. And it is this spiritually formative thing. And somehow through reading a book, which feels appropriate, I read a book called The Hidden Power of Electronic Culture, and that just sparked my imagination. This was like 10 years ago, and it kind of, it changed the trajectory for me. And I was like, man, I'm so fascinated in how technology is shaping our spiritual lives. And so I kind of just went down that path kind of as a hobby for about uh, 8 or 10 years. And then, I just kept reading, but then finally, yeah, Durham University, Pete Phillips at Durham University started this program in digital theology. And as soon as I heard about it, I knew that was for me. I actually had a trip planned to Durham prior to hearing about this.
Wow.
I had a cousin that was working at Durham. And so I I said, "Hey, when I'm there, can I interview for this program in digital theology?" And they're like, "Yeah, let's make it happen." So, God really started lining up these opportunities, opening doors, and yeah, Pete said yes. So I was part of the first cohort that went through the program.
Wow.
Got this fantastic taste of the UK, and just experienced life across the pond. Um, and saw, got to look back at my space in the US from a different vantage point and see uh see just even the relationship between the church and the government is different in the UK than it is in the US, and to see both the advantages and disadvantages of the way that the US is structured. And so yeah, lots of things like that. But the after I finished my degree at Durham in January 2020.
Yeah.
And two months later, the pandemic starts, and suddenly digital theology feels really relevant.
God's
And
timing, you might
yeah,
say, Adam.
absolutely, God's timing. I went into the program not knowing what am I going to do with a digital theology degree, and came out and live streaming and just the way that digital has sort of permeated our lives. It became very relevant very fast.
Wow.
And very prominent in people's minds. So at that point, I left the publisher that I was working for and started working with FaithTech, and was with them for 2 years, bridging that gap between faith and technology. And yeah, doing a lot of work with them. And then, yeah, hosting a podcast, Device and Virtue, with a buddy of mine, Chris, who's also sort of interested in these things. We met on the internet way back when, and eventually that became an in-person friendship. And we just kept arguing about technology. So we decided, hey, let's subject other people to our arguments. And so yeah, we've been doing that for a couple of years. And so yeah, my life is just kind of permeated with digital and faith, and trying to figure out how do these things kind of relate together. We sort of intuitively know that they do, but we are still trying to figure out how. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
And you're a gift. You're an absolute gift, mate. And thank God that he brought you over to Durham and that you could see this wonderful nation that we live in here in England. And
Absolutely. Oh man, it was beautiful.
Experience. You had fish and chips, right? You did experience
Oh,
the good life.
absolutely. Absolutely did. Yeah.
Let me ask this question then, Adam, which I know is like a passion question for yours, which might open up. I think it'll relate to a lot of people that are listening. But the question is, how is digital technology discipling me? Your insights and knowledge into that. How is it discipling us? We all have these devices. We've all got various apps going on. Obviously I work for Glorify. I love the world I'm in there.
Yeah.
I'm really
great.
aware. I'm really aware of this world inside out. But
Yeah.
but how are they discipling us? Because if you walk into the church world, that it's not that there's two camps, but that, when people don't understand stuff, they just go with one or the other camp, or when they understand it, they go the other way.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
kind of like, you're getting pastors at the moment saying, well, nothing will replace in person. Totally agree. But it's the kind of like stance of, I don't know what it is, so I won't touch it. We just got to go for the kind
Yeah.
of USP of gathering together type feel. But how is it? How is digital technology discipling us?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with what may be a controversial claim, but I think more people will probably agree with it than would have in the past. And that's we sort of have this brain bound concept of spiritual formation. We think that sanctification equals education, right? And so we're constantly educating ourselves. We're learning more information. And we think that, if I just know enough, that will be the spiritual formation that I need. That will produce the sort of Christ likeness and life that God has for me if I just know enough stuff. And I just want to sort of push back against that sort of brain bound idea and work towards this idea of we're not just brains who are taking in information, but we're minds with bodies, and that our bodies are integrally connected to what our spiritual formation looks like. And so a simple example would be like with a keyboard. When you're writing with a keyboard, you're not really thinking about what you're doing. You have sort of this precognitive awareness that you type and type and type, and you're not really kind of paying attention. And so in some ways you've taken that keyboard and it's become a part of your mental framework. But it's through your body, it's through your hands that you've sort of developed this extension of yourself, this extension of both your thinking and your speaking. And in reality, when we think about the ways that when we think about a brain bound sort of approach to spiritual formation, I find my mind is wandering all over the place all the time, and I can't really like rein it in. It when I try and sit down to pray, when I try and sit down to like focus on the word, my brain is going in 1,000 directions.
Right.
And I find that like I need to engage my body in ways that are encouraging focus and helping to sort of center myself. So that might be like going for a walk, or even just like opening my hands, or if you're charismatic, you might raise your hands up in a church service. If you're Catholic, you might cross yourself, but you're using your body in these ways to sort of center yourself, right, to center your mind, focus your mind.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly using our bodies in ways to help our minds do things. And so it's not just this brain bound project where we're just learning information. It's no, our bodies need to be involved. And so then take that and kind of bring that into the technology space. And our bodies are constantly involved in the technologies that we're a part of. So a story that kind of exemplifies this for me is we in the US had a pastor, maybe you guys heard about it a couple months ago, who was suspended from his church for direct messaging with a woman who wasn't his wife. They started messaging on Instagram, and he didn't really think anything of it until a friend of hers came to him and kind of confronted him about it. He goes to his, church staff or trusted kind of accountability people and said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And they're like, "Yeah, this is probably an unhealthy relationship that you have here in this Instagram messaging." And so, he's taking time away from that. He's a prominent pastor at a large church, heads up a church planting organization. And so this is a big deal here in the US. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but as I thought about that experience and thought about, okay, what was his experience like in kind of moving into that space, right? So what's happening sort of in both mind and body, but also in sort of his environment and in the community itself. And so that you've got your smartphone, it's kind of sitting in the palm of your hand, and he's typing things out, but he's never saying them out loud. And so he doesn't have any he's not hearing himself say these things. They're happening in this place that actually excludes the community around him. No one else knows about it. No one else is seeing it. It's like spending time in a private room with this person, and no one else is sort of witness to it. in a way that they can say, maybe you should think about that.
Right.
And so, he's got this sort of everything is kind of telling his body, this is a private space. These things are don't need to be said. They don't need to alert you. And even just the size of the phone, like it's the size of your hand. It's this small space. So this idea that like it's big and significant isn't really conveyed in just the experience of the smartphone itself. And then, the smartphone makes it that he's available and she's available to each other constantly, all the time, anywhere. He can be in his office at work, he can be out to lunch, he can be in his bedroom, he can be in his living room, but like it's all sort of this private thing that's happening. And then even just his experience of her, they're texting. He knows who she is, but like all the time he's not seeing her. He's not seeing the impact of his words are having. He can only imagine her. So that's where his brain comes into this, and he's using it in an imaginative way to perhaps imagine what she's saying to him or he's saying to her. And all of these things are sort of very subtle, enough that he felt like he wasn't even aware that it was an issue for a long time, until it was brought to his attention in person by someone else who said, hey, you need to think about this. And props to him for bringing in his community, right, and saying like, all right, we need to bring more people around this and have a community of people speaking into it. And suddenly it breaks open the smartphone, and it says, okay, this isn't just our this private space that's forming and shaping the way that I'm seeing things. It's actually, I want to open this up for a spiritually formative context of this community.
Just jump in there as well. Credit to him. Obviously, we know the scenario here, but he did it immediately. He got approached at church.
Right.
He immediately went to his board of elders, the team. In that moment, it wasn't like 7 days later. Right. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just driving home, like, as far as what I've read from it, it's quite exemplary what's gone on. It's quite a different standard to what we used to of the other drivel that right. We've been reading for months and months and months. Like the way he handled this crossover of digital and stuff is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And so, the thing that I want to just sort of highlight is the way that the Instagram direct messaging smartphone experience is sort of shaping his perceptions of what's happening and subtly reframing what is a spiritually formative experience for him. And it wasn't until he sort of broke out of that smartphone box that it could become something that was more spiritually formative, more valuable to him. But it came with a lot of pain, a lot of, a sense of shame and embarrassment. And the smartphone in that case sort of really covered up a lot of that, or just obscured it in ways. And I think, for the rest of us, we're doing these kind of interactions all the time, and we're having these kinds of experiences, and we're not necessarily aware of the ways that our technology, and this isn't just a smartphone, it's all sorts of different things, the way that all these things are kind of working into our minds and hearts through our bodily engagement, but also through the environments that they create, the environment that is around us, and the ways that communities are involved or are not involved. And so, that's one example. I think another example is even live streaming. We've talked about live streaming church. That was a big part of the pandemic. And we kind of intuitively recognize there's something missing here. But again, it's how is this experience of live streaming kind of informing our spiritual lives. We're on if you were in a small church, maybe you were on Zoom and you saw other people, but you saw them from like the shoulders up, and you couldn't necessarily read all their body language, and maybe they were in a small box along with a Brady Bunch array of different people, so you couldn't really read the expressions of very many people. You couldn't interact with them one-on-one the way you can in person. Or maybe you're in a large church that had really high production values and you really just kind of sat back and watched, and you didn't really even see other people. You were just sort of this passive participant. And then you're on Zoom, or you're maybe texting in a chat window on a church online live stream, and the only you see kind of maybe a picture of yourself, so you're more aware of yourself in that process.
Right.
Or you write something in the text window, and you kind of see it work up, and you're like, should I have said it that way? And suddenly you're not focused on the the preaching or the music or the other things that are going on. You're more focused on yourself and more aware of yourself in that process. And the space itself is different for you in your home than it is for me in my home. And so there's lots of other things that can be going on while you're in church virtually, versus us all being together seeing the same things that are happening. And so all of those things, I think, they have this sort of spiritually formative impact that's happening kind of prior to our intentions. They're, in the same way that I don't have to think about the keyboard when I'm typing. Like I'm not thinking about my experience on Zoom. I'm not thinking about my experience sort of watching it until it kind of is brought to my attention, but I'm not aware of how it's working its way back into my own heart and mind, and becoming a part of my ways of thinking, ways of interacting. And so, yeah, that's sort of the best, way I can unpack that idea of how digital technology specifically is discipling us. And I think all technology, even, physical, machines and so forth, cars, etc., are all have similar impacts, but we're not aware of how they are. And the more we think about our formation in beyond the brain, beyond just like the idea that we have our mind in our body, and our body is somehow, full of passions and desires that are wrong. If we can kind of reframe that and recognize our passions and desires are God-given, and they're things that are leading us back to Him, who is the fulfillment of all our desires, then we can start to recognize that our bodies need to be involved in the spiritual formation that's going on, even to just help our minds focus and listen, read scripture, pray, listen to the Holy Spirit. And we're so pulled in so many directions by all our digital technology, it's become very hard. And I think people intuitively know that, but my goal is really to sort of figure out how can we unpack this and sort of look at the pieces of it. And for me, that's looking at our bodies. It is looking at our minds, but it's also looking at our environment, our built environment, and then the community around us, and how technology is shaping all of those things to sort of help us to start to get a grasp on the ways that technology is forming us. Because I think then we can look at ways that the church can embrace those things.
So I want to go there.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to you unpack this, thinking, I never thought of that. Never thought the subtleties, never thought that I'm aware of it, right? I'm very aware. I'm aware that when I wake up on the morning, one of the first things I have to stop doing, like a desire, is look at my phone.
Oh man, so much.
And that is like, and I can convince myself it's fine, right?
Right.
Like, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
I have a little routine on a morning where, I get up and I read my Bible. Not
Mm-hmm.
every morning, but I try to do it as often as possible. I'm not a legalistic Larry on it. I do it as much as I can, and
Yeah.
as much as I'm enjoying it,
Yeah.
and a bit of discipline thrown into the mix. But that temptation, I've never connected the physical is also within the digital and what's
Mm-hmm.
going on at those points.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you do as a church? Because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, oh well, we're all doomed. It's the most so Adam, give us some hope. We're
Oh
all doomed
man.
because how are we ever going to compete with this subtle interactions, or compete's the wrong word. How do we embrace it? How do
Yeah.
we open up our minds to engage with it?
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think things like what Glorify is doing are a good start. You know, our smartphones are so immersive because they're interactive, right? I can spend, an hour either scrolling or navigating on my phone and totally tune out everything that's around me, right?
Mm.
But like we refer to that as distraction, but isn't that just a different form of focus? Like we're so focused that we're tuning out everything around us. And what if that sort of focus was centered on the Holy Spirit speaking? What if our smartphones were a place where we could encounter uh, God's voice,
Mm.
and in ways that we could, you know, interact with, so to speak, be engaged with in that sort of really focused way that we find ourselves focused on our smartphones. Like, are there apps and uh, and ideas on our smartphones, create creative interactions that can help us become more aware of God's Spirit? Um, I think I think there is great opportunity for Christians um, to design some of these things, to think imaginatively about some of these things. One of the practices that I have been mulling over and trying a little bit myself is, I guess, what I would call prayer scrolling. uh we talk about doom scrolling throughout the pandemic. You just spend
Right.
hours scrolling through all the bad news. But for me, what if I spent time scrolling Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is, Twitter, and asked questions like, you know what do I hear the Holy Spirit saying here?
whilst
What
whilst doing it.
whilst doing it? Yeah.
Okay, so you're not searching you're not
No,
searching
no.
prayer. You're scrolling through the soccer results, you're scrolling through whatever
Yeah.
else is on your feed, but saying, Holy Spirit, speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, what emotions is it bringing up? Like, if I'm on Twitter and I feel angry, or I feel afraid, or I feel anxious, or I feel sad, like, those are emotions, those are God-given emotions, responses to these events, what people are saying, whatever it is I'm reading or watching. But having that opportunity for it to become part of a dialogue with the Lord, um, in a way that is very personal. And what's been interesting to me is, in the times that I've done it, I've found a lot of the content, it feels less relevant to me. It feels less meaningful. It feels less important than it would otherwise. And suddenly I have this larger picture
Mm,
that includes God and His Spirit,
mm,
kind of infringing on this, and coming to bear on it. And I think, okay, yeah, this thing, this bold claim that is going viral, like, so what? It doesn't have this great meaning that maybe it would otherwise.
right.
And if it can drive me to prayer, or it can just make me aware of the passions and desires God has given me to advance His kingdom, or to uh you know love my family better,
Mm.
or it makes me aware of the ways that I'm, desiring things that are disordered, and I'm, idolizing things that I think will bring me peace or joy or excitement. If I can bring God into those things, then there's an opportunity there for him to speak. And I think for me too, it's also made me more aware of just how much I need to be scrolling through scripture, so to speak. Like, I need to be hearing the voice of God speaking through his word, in order to tune my heart to hear that when I'm scrolling.
Yeah, it's another nice phrasing of it, which is, I think for me, picking up my phone is synonymous with like wrong, because of
Yeah.
the world we're in, right? Like, you pick up your phone,
Yeah.
unless you're making an old school phone call, you know, everything else fits into like time wasting, wrong,
Yeah.
slave to the system because it's some sort of email, Slack type of channel stuff, whatever it might be. And so you just like it, and you have this like micro moments of just accusations, right? Which is you're involved with. But essentially, I love what you're saying there, which is, well, hold up, once have you invited, practicing the presence? What have you invited the Holy Spirit into all that?
Right.
Is a lovely thought. Look, aware of time, I've got lots of questions, but can I just ask you another question? With your head on stuff, is technology decentralizing the church?
Oh yeah, I've heard this question a little bit.
And for anyone listening whilst you're thinking, so keep thinking, the decentralization I'm talking about is, I just spoke to the pastor today. He reckons that now a regular attendee at his church comes 1 in 4. And that's post-pandemic because they've been used to just essentially getting fed online. And then they understand we need to come back in person. And so 1 in 4 kind of fulfills that kind of like quota, right?
Yeah.
But is it decentralizing because you can just go anywhere you want and get listen to this podcast, your podcast, if you want to be pepped up about some sort of church stuff, digital stuff, jump online to the world's best communicators and Bible scholars. It's all accessible.
Right.
So are we decentralizing the gathered church?
I want to say yes and no. I think there are ways that it is decentralizing in the sense of what you're saying. Like, I can listen to a podcast from my pastor, or I can listen to a podcast from, some famous pastor that I am aware of. And if I don't like what my pastor says, I can go find a pastor who says what I like. And, so there is sort of this deconstructing of authority and the role that a local church is playing in sort of my community and my connections. But the ways that I think it's centralizing, it's not centralizing churches or denominations, it's centralizing platforms like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whoever. Those are the centers of authority in a lot of ways. That's why they're so controversial right now, is we see them kind of holding so much power in who gets platformed, who gets deplatformed, what content goes viral, what content gets downgraded. And those are big issues. And so I think there is a sense in which the church is sort of losing out its positional authority to the platforms that it's using to reach people. These platforms are managing that communication space. And so in that sense, you could say, yes, the church is being decentralized because it's, being pushed out of the sort of those centers of power. Another way that I hear people talk about it is the church is being democratized, or digital is democratizing, all this content. So you have, influencers who are not pastors, not church leaders, but they have huge followings and they're talking about their faith. They're, I mean, that was happening with things like publishing. You saw all sorts of people who were doing all sorts of ministry inside and outside the church, and they gained a following through their books and writings. And so we definitely see that trajectory prior to digital has definitely exacerbated it. But yeah, there's new centers of power and authority, both from people within the church but also beyond the church. So it's a bit of a yes and no, I would say. It probably is to the degree it probably will be to the degree that church leaders are not pursuing that sort of influence online. But I'll say a lot of the notion of decentralization is a question of power, and it's a question of who has authority. And I think when I think about what Jesus is doing, he's not working in he's not measuring himself against a standard of power. He's measuring himself against a standard of love. And I think if the church and church leaders are choosing love over power, they're gonna do what the kingdom is calling them for, and they're gonna bring the kingdom in the ways that they need to. And so, as long as we're sort of measuring ourselves against a standard of power, we're gonna fail, and we're going to fail the kingdom, whether or not, even if we obtain power. But if we can pursue love, I think we're going to be better off in the long run.
Wow, I mean, Adam, that's a really, essentially, you've just slapped me with that thought. Is what I like about it. It's been like, and it is a lovely. It sounds lovely to listen to it, and when you describe that, it's like you yearn for what you've just described, and then you come back down to earth with a bump in your thoughts and think, we're so far from this.
But and I struggle with it. I mean, you just read my bio off my website, and like that is, there's power in having a website and having a following on Twitter. Like, those are things that I am tempted by, and so it is it's a constant struggle for any sort of Christian.
I just want to jump in and say a big thank you to the sponsor of this podcast, who is Compassion. And I want to quickly read a letter that I received from a child that our family helps sponsor every single month. And the amazing thing with Compassion is letters get written to you from the children that you help each month. And this one goes, "Dear Mr. Richard and Mrs. Jules, greetings from my family and friends. How are you going? I'm so happy that this morning I can write to you. How's your family? We have started school again after Easter's holiday. I've been promoted to grade 6. Thank you for the gift you sent to me. We received a cow from the project. My family and I are so grateful to God for you. May God bless you and the work that you hands do. Thank you. Much love, Gladys." These letters and this help that we can provide this family is a real small act, but means a huge amount. I'm sure when we sent some money to that family, I know how it works with Compassion. The money goes direct to the family. They've received a cow, and my family, my 3 kids, my wife and I, are able to know that we're helping someone the other side of the world. And the way that Compassion do this is so special. I've seen firsthand how it works on the ground in Kenya, and they do them all over the world. So I want to encourage you, if you've not engaged in Compassion, maybe there's cynicism involved, maybe you think it's just not for me, maybe you're like, well, I just don't have the money. Can I encourage you just to maybe break out and think about, could you help? Because what it's done for our family is huge, and obviously what it's doing for another family is hugely beneficial. We get to play a very small part in making sure that a child in another part of the world is able to be fed, looked after, schooled, and loved by a Christian community. I think that's really special, and there's no one better in the world than Compassion to do it. So go check them out on their website, compassion.org.uk, and let's jump straight back into the conversation with Adam. Well, it leads me to my last question, which is an awful question, but it's one that I think might kick some stuff out. It's the last one because I think is that if Jesus was on the planet now, would he have an Instagram channel, TikTok, and a YouTube channel with a Facebook mopping some stuff up?
Oh man, that's a hard question. I think Peter would. He'd probably be taking like, or Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John would all be doing it. But I mean, Jesus didn't write anything himself, as far as we know. He maybe built some chairs and tables. So he was very much a technologist in his own right. But yeah, he was preaching and teaching and letting everyone else kind of both record it in word, but also record it in the transformation of their own lives. And I think he probably would have let his miracles and teachings do the work of the influence he was looking for. So am I saying no? Maybe I am. Yeah.
I think you are. Yeah. Because it doesn't really fit the Jesus we know to just be doing a selfie or a quick Instagram stories or a TikTok of his morning. It just, I don't, and I get it. Everyone's got a different version of Jesus. They relate to him in a different way. Yeah. But I just can't see that version of it. But
yeah. And I will say, like, Jesus had concentric circles. He had his closest three, James, John, and Peter. And then he had his 12. And then he had the 72. And then he had the 5,000. And like, he didn't have a personal interaction with all 5,000 people. He had an impact on them. And so there are these notions of scale within Jesus' ministry, from most personal to least personal. And that happens online too. So there is ways for thinking about some of that.
So we could probably conclude he'd have a WhatsApp group for his disciples, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Where it could be like, boys, where are you? Like, we said we were turning up. None of you are here. Please,
absolutely,
quick. Yes. And it probably helped. It would have helped him out a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe the public, like, look at me stuff might not have been on there. Yeah. I mean, Adam, I would love to talk more on this front, and I think it's fascinating. I was saying to the other day to a friend of mine that I was chatting to. He said, you're gonna have a great chat. I was like, I have this theory though. I have a theory that my kids are gonna grow up, and it's an unfounded theory because my kids are the eldest is 8. Okay. That when they grow up, they're gonna look back and go, "You had mobile phones in the house."
Like, oh, interesting. Like they were cigarettes.
Like, yeah, like what? Why would you even do that? Like, you gave them to people who were under whatever age they end up. You know what I mean? I can't. And that kind of like that idea that they'd understand the power and they'd understand that it just didn't produce, and this great experiment that we're in. Yeah. Just didn't produce, and all the stats and all the stuff that goes with mental health, which we know is deeply linked to a lot of the digital stuff that we're involved in. Yeah. And so I don't know. I have this purist thought that maybe that's how the next generation to grow up, which is like we not only we know how to use it, but we understand it's a weapon, and weapons are dangerous. Whereas at the moment we're treating them like duvets, pillows, and you know what I mean? We are so cuddled up to them. It's unreal. And so maybe it's a fantasy kind of like, that would be amazing if that came about of, like the next generation way down the line is going to come through. And because you look at like the Roman Empire, it never kept going, like they thought it would, in this kind of like, they were on the brink of all sorts of amazing, the way they built stuff and the way that they conquered things. And it was like, why would life ever go back from that? And it was like, because people realized it wasn't sustainable, and it kind of like imploded on itself. Yeah. And you look and you think, I think what we see is a lot of imploding on itself. and I don't think we're going to go back to like striking two sticks together to try create sparks type level. But I think my hope would be that there would be generations that come through that are like, we've learned. And it's not even a Christian thing. It's just a life thing. It's not Christians saying smoking's bad and everyone else is going, no, it's not. It's everyone going, we've learned.
Yeah. I think my hope is they look back and think, what were you guys panicking about? We we've figured out how to manage this much better. We have, limits or restrictions that we've created that make this a much healthier relationship. You guys were out of whack. We've integrated it much better. I do think, it can be a weapon. I think it can also be a tool. And I've really struggled with the sort of ambivalence that technology has in terms of just, you can use it for good, you can use it for evil. And like, why is that? And part of me thinks that it's because God has given us free will. And he's given us the opportunity to use these tools for good, for evil, to glorify him or not. And he's given us that choice, and that is a great freedom, but it is a great responsibility, and we kind of have to figure it out. And my hope is that your 8-year-old will have a better handle on it than either of us do.
Yeah, I'm going to subscribe to a Netflix DVD service.
Yes, I totally recommend that.
Adam, you've been so good. Thank you so much. How can people
Rich.
get more from you? How can they find out more about you?
Yeah, you can definitely listen to our podcast, Device and Virtue. I'm continuing to do some writing for FaithTech, faithtech.com. You can check out my website. There's not a lot to update there, but adamgraber.com. Yeah.
Adam, bless you, mate, and keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Cool. Thanks, Rich.
Fascinating there from Adam, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's a bit different to what I usually do, but I love Adam's take on stuff, and he writes so eloquently as well. He's a depth and wealth of knowledge that if that kind of lit you up, go check his stuff out. And a massive thank you for jumping in on here. I love doing these podcasts, so you can find more at richmartin.co.uk or just DM me. All right, have a great rest of your week.